Hey everyone, and welcome to the Sunny Go One Piece podcast. On this episode, we're going to be covering episodes 795 through 797, which will cover manga chapters 834 through 836. And things are beginning to heat up in this arc with our introduction to one of Big Mom's Sweet Three generals. So, synopsis. Pedro and Brook, now in Sweet City, are trying to figure out where to proceed next, but are in for a rude awakening after discovering that their entire plan has been leaked and that Big Mom are on to all of them. All the while, Luffy continues searching the Seducing Woods for Nami, Chopper, and Carrot, and he keeps winding back in the same place, but does somehow find Nami, and the two now find themselves having to contend with one of Big Mom's Sweet Three generals, Cracker, as well as Brûlé. Alright, so differences. So on the whole, these episodes don't really have too many fillers or changes for that matter. There are a couple scenes that are kind of just slightly elongated, like for example, the scene with the tributes giving their souls in the church. In the manga, that's only like one panel, but this scene shows like far more people giving up their souls and all that stuff, as well as there's a scene that has Cracker being told to go to the Seducing Woods by Big Mom. That kind of isn't in the manga, but again, for the most part, it's all pretty accurate to the manga. But like the last few episodes, it does keep cutting back to Luffy in the Seducing Woods, and in episode 795, just after Peckhams is shot off the cliff, there is a brief filler scene of Luffy capturing a Sanji copy, but then immediately is confronted by another Sanji copy. And this scene is to set up the actual canon scene from the manga of when we do see that Luffy has gone around and caught all the multiple copies of everyone and have them stacked in front of Pound. In fact, the first canon scene we actually get to see of Luffy in the Seducing Forest after being split off from the rest of the crew is the final scene of 795. So everything prior to that is actually just added filler. So that's probably the biggest change and biggest addition to making sure that the episodes are long enough we keep cutting back to Luffy in the Seducing Woods, when in the manga we don't actually see Luffy doing all this stuff until we actually see this huge pile of copies that he's amassed in front of Pound. So yeah, with that being said, let's get into the episodes, and we begin these with the news circulating throughout Totoland that Jinbei had betrayed the Big Mom pirates by asking to leave. But the article states when he learns of the price to leave, he chickens out. But knowing Jinbei, that had to have been a lie to cover up what really happened, which is something Brook even notes to himself. So for now, we don't know what has happened with Jinbei yet, but I think it is safe to assume that he somehow got out of giving up his lifespan, or even a limb, at least for now. During all this, Brook and Pedro are around as this news is being discussed all throughout town, and Brook mentions to Pedro that Jinbei is an important person to him and the crew. And I really loved that Brook already considers him part of the crew and really cares for him just as he would as if he was already with them and traveling with them. The warmth in Brook's phrasing by using the word taisetsu in Japanese for the word important has this sort of personal significance and connotation to it, and I really like that. And this is where Brook puts it together, the reason that Fishman Island was under Big Mom's protection, as well as the reason he couldn't join the crew right away, was because of this. And I also really like how he was able to put that together too. Pedro and Brook then coming across a confusing and distressing discovery that Pudding is stuck having to try on dresses and has not been able to inform Sanji nor lead Sanji to the coast to meet the others, which we already know, but their reaction to the fact that the Big Mom pirates are fully aware of their infiltration into Totoland and that Peckhams was guiding them is absolutely hilarious. Furthermore, they inform Baron Tamago that they're in the Seducing Woods, and their reactions just keep getting funnier and funnier. Also, since they don't have a wanted poster for Carrot, they have a portrait of her, and on that poster it's written Rabbit Mink at the bottom, and this kind of calls back to the Unluckies and Mr. 13 drawing all the sketches of them for Crocodile, and I just thought about that when I saw this scene for the first time. The cherry on top is when they reveal that they also know about Brook and Pedro, who are standing right there behind the corner, and it is so damn funny. like Baron Tamago mentions that he knows Pedro and corrects them that he's not a leopard mink and that he's in fact a jaguar. Weirdly though, in the Crunchyroll subs, they translate Pedro's poster as panther, which I can kind of understand how that happened, as the word hyo, which is what they use, it's written on the poster. But yeah, it's just, but when you use hyo, both, it does apply to leopard and panther in Japanese, but usually what you think of when you hear panther is like a large black jungle cat, like the Carolina Panthers from the NFL, or, you know, Bagheera from Jungle Book. They're usually, those Black Panthers are referred to as kurohyo, or literally Black Panther, as kuro is black and hyo being leopard or panther. So they often just straight up say panther, except with a Japanese accent, pansa. But, you know, I mean, clearly Pedro is a leopard, not a panther. Like, when you look at him, he is a leopard. There's really no mistaking it. So, yeah, this is a bit of, like, translation sort of nuance lost. And I think when you just look at it straight through a dictionary, yes, hyo does mean both leopard and panther. But when you look at the context of this, clearly he is a leopard. He's got the spots. He's more of a tannish, orangish yellow color, you know, like a leopard is. So yeah, I thought that was interesting. I think I can give them a pass on this because yeah, if it was just a translator looking at it from the lens of like looking up the words and stuff, yeah, you could get that easily mixed up. Anyways, moving on. There's a great bit of visual storytelling and hinting happening here as Brook and Pedro wonder how they're being monitored so closely, as in both the anime and the manga, the way the shot is framed, as Brook says this line, in the foreground, you see two of the flowers with the faces, you know, the homies staring right at them, implying that the talking plants and the other sentient environmental objects are actually the ones relaying that information. And Baron Tamago laments the fact that Peckham's betrayed them and how he was planning on begging Big Mom for his forgiveness given their sort of long partnership that they've had. But now with this revelation, it has complicated quite a few things for him. And it'll be interesting to see what the fallout is when it comes to Peckham's. And speaking of Peckham's, in the next scene, we get an answer to a couple mysteries that were presented at the beginning of this arc. First is what happened to Peckham's, and he was in fact captured by Bej and is now being executed yet again by Bej, but this time he's not only shot but also sent off a cliff into a shark-infested water, which is really bad for a devil fruit user, but seeing as again how we don't actually see him die, I have my doubts as to whether he was actually dead or not when I first read this. Speaking of Bej, we learn here that he has a son named Pez, whose name could be a reference to either Pez Candy, like the other members of the Charlotte family, or Pez is also Spanish for fish, as well as being a food item. But I always like to think that it's for the candy. I just think it makes more sense. He's already dressed like his father with a fedora, and his binky is in the shape of a cigar, just like his father too, which is too funny and cute. But the big reveal here is that Pez's mother and Bej's wife is that Lola lookalike woman, and this person is clearly not Lola, and it's revealed that the reason for this is because this woman is Big Mom's 22nd daughter, Chiffon, who is most likely Lola's twin sister, and we do get that confirmation later on in the next several episodes. But when this was revealed, I started to wonder what food or dessert item Lola was actually referencing, and I think it's supposed to represent roll cake, because chiffon is a type of cake, and Lola's pirate crew is called the Rolling Pirates. And when you actually say Lola in Japanese, you actually say Rora. And so, like, it sounds a lot like roll cake when you say it in Japanese. And also with the revelation later on of her father, which we'll get into, it really matches that same thematic through line of all of them being named cakes. And I do find this scene really conflicting because it's funny to see the surprise that Bej is actually a really doting father. But at the same time, it's so crazy that he has this infant son at an execution, and an execution of a character that I really enjoy too. Like Peckham's, I love Peckham's. And Peckhams is almost 99% not dead. At the time, it was curious, and what I didn't really understand is why Bedge decided to take it upon himself to execute him by himself instead of turning him over to Big Mom and having her deal with him. He could have even maybe garnered some favor with her, but instead he kept this all a secret and executed Peckhams himself. What I didn't realize was there was a clue here in the dialogue that I missed originally when I first read this, but I won't spoil it here, but I'll give you a hint. The line that serves as the clue is that just before Peckhams gets shot, he yells out, "You're underestimating Mama." And I'll leave it at that. Because, that is definitely a clue. And after this, we learn more about Big Mom's relationship to Caesar and why she wanted him back so much. And it's here that it's revealed that the person that commissioned his experimentation of gigantification of people was none other than Big Mom to achieve her dream of being able to make giant people so that all people can sit eye to eye with her as equals at her dinner table or her parties, which on the surface is a really noble dream. But again, as we've seen with everything regarding Big Mom and Whole Cake Island, there is a very dark and twisted side to it. And this time, it's the cost of researching this because we know Caesar was experimenting on children, causing them to become sick and even dying, which he even laments to himself at how impossible this is because of all those results. Of course, like with everything Caesar, he is a liar, knowing it was impossible to begin with, and was basically grifting one of the most powerful and terrifying people in the world for money. And instead of using it on the research, he was using it on call girls, like calling these like ships of all these girls, and he was basically just wasting money on girls and booze and stuff. And he blames his failures on Luffy and Law interfering with his research on Punk Hazard, but then Big Mom tells Caesar that her Minister of Candy has gone ahead and recreated his lab from Punk Hazard using candy and his ability to manipulate candy here on Whole Cake Island. To Caesar's horrified shock, speaking of the Minister of Candy though, we are immediately introduced to him as Big Mom's eldest son, Perospero, who possesses the Pero Pero no Mi, or the Lick Lick fruit, which apparently gives him the power to produce candy. And when this was first revealed, I imagined this working kind of like Galdino's Dorodoro candle powers, but with candy instead. Like, Pero Pero is the onomatopoeia for the sound of licking in Japanese, so it's like licking candy, or more like a sucker or a lollipop. And I don't think we have something like that in English, but I guess it's similar to like our slurp slurp sort of onomatopoeia. And I can see why Big Mom named him Perospero, because what would you name a baby born with a massive tongue like that? You really don't have any choice, so it's a very appropriate name to name a baby that looks like that. But also the fact that, again, like every character in One Piece, they get a very appropriate double fruit power that matches their appearance or name. And of course, Perospero's name is a reference to the aforementioned Pero Pero onomatopoeia, but I've seen that he could also be a reference to Prospero from the Shakespeare play The Tempest, who was also kind of a sorcerer-like character. And his character design, following sort of the fairy tale and candy theming, has a lot in common with like Willy Wonka from the Charlie and the Chocolate Factory story by Roald Dahl, as well as the colored top hat and long jacket and cane. But also the top hat and even the appearance, like the long duster jacket, could also be a reference to the Mad Hatter from Alice in Wonderland, as we've seen many things being taken from Alice in Wonderland. But yeah, Perospero is shown to be now in possession of Caesar's detached heart after it was handed over to the Fire Tank Pirates by Sanji during their journey to Whole Cake Island. But yeah, now that we've gotten a chance to see Big Mom talk a little bit more, one interesting thing that may not be picked up by non-Japanese speakers is the pronouns that Big Mom uses are more of the masculine variety. Now, I know the topic of pronouns are very politically charged in the US, but this conversation isn't really anything to do with that. I'm not talking about the fact that she uses pronouns to identify as like a transgender. I'm fairly certain that Big Mom is physically a woman and it identifies as a woman. But what I'm referring to is when she speaks, she uses the word ore to refer to herself, which in modern day Japan is a very casual and masculine way of saying me. Much of the time, you'll hear women refer to themselves with more feminine coded pronouns like atashi, which is far more feminine, and or they'll use like the more neutral, like gender neutral watashi to refer to themselves as in the first person. However, Big Mom uses ore, and to a native Japanese speaker, it definitely stands out to the point where even people were asking Oda about it, and he responded to this question in an SBS Q&A of volume 85, saying, quote, "Even today, there are regions of the country where women still use the pronoun ore when referring to themselves. In the past, it was once used equally by both men and women, so I didn't really think it was that unusual of an idea. But if that's weird to you, I'm surprised that I didn't get more questions about the pronoun that I completely invented for Ivankov, watashi." And so, yeah, basically, Oda is basically saying that, yeah, it really doesn't matter. So on the surface, it does seem like Oda didn't really give this much thought, but whether it was intentional or not, I think it does show that Big Mom, by using ore, it puts her in a more like tougher and more aggressive category of person, and especially when it comes from a woman, it speaks to kind of her upbringing, which we'll get into later in this arc. And yeah, I do think it does add to her character, and it gives her sort of that more tougher and aggressive, and kind of, I don't know, I guess from my perspective, being so used to sort of the ore and atashi and watashi, like the delineation between men, women, and neutral, I do think it does give Big Mom a little bit more of a, I don't know, an uncanniness to her when she refers to herself as ore, despite being this like massive hulking person. It still feels a little weird, and so I think it adds this kind of that unsettling nature of the villainous, side of Big Mom. Incidentally, in that same SBS, Oda revealed that Big Mom is 68 years old and has been birthing babies for 42 of those years, and she's had twins, but apparently she's also had quintuplets, and her largest pregnancy was a decuplet, like basically, she's had 10 babies in one pregnancy at once, which is absolutely wild to think. But I guess she does have the hips for that, considering how massive she is. But moving on to episode 796, we begin the episode in a completely different area where we see a bunch of normal people funneling into a dark church where they line up in front of those black wispy looking blobs. And each time they ask the person, leave or life, similar to how Big Mom would ask Moscato or Jinbei. And each time the person would choose life and have a small bit of what I'm assuming is their lifespan being taken. And later on, it's revealed that it's part of their soul. Like almost like a tithe in church, to the point where they're even collecting them in straw baskets like you would see in a typical Christian church. Presumably the choice is that they either pay a bit of their lifespan in order to remain in Totoland, or else they would be exiled, or maybe even worse. At this point, I was incredibly curious what Big Mom's powers were and how they worked, because I still couldn't quite figure it out. But thankfully, I didn't need to wait too much longer for an explanation, as in the chapter/episode, we do learn that Big Mom has the Soru Soru no Mi, or the Soul fruit, from Pound in the Seducing Woods. And what we are witnessing here is that every 6 months, every citizen of Totoland needs to give a month's worth of their soul for the safety of living in Totoland, so that she can use them, and she can then manipulate those souls by putting them into stuff, giving them life. So what we've been seeing is people's souls giving life to a bunch of inanimate objects. Again, this is a really twisted version of basically the appliances that come to life in the Disney version of like Beauty and the Beast. He does mention how those souls can't be put into corpses, which would be crazy if that were the case, because that would allow Big Mom to be able to make zombies, similar to how Moria would stuff shadows. And so for now, it looks like that specific ability is still very much Moria's ability to make zombies. However, these souls can be put into animals and give them human-like qualities, like Randolph the rabbit and that alligator that we saw earlier. And she can essentially create an army of minks, or kind of like pseudo zone fruit users, which is kind of crazy too. This devil fruit is freaking wild, though, with all the possibilities that it opens up. And it's no wonder Big Mom is so damn powerful, because not only does she have that physical stature and physical strength, which is incredible, but on top of that, she's got an insane devil fruit power. I mean, this combination is just crazy. And I remember wondering, though, if she manipulates souls, how her powers would interact with Brook, as he can somewhat also affect souls. And he himself can turn him into a soul, or at least his soul form. And also, he technically has an infinite lifespan. So if she ever got a hold of him, can she just take from him indefinitely, and is basically like a soul life battery almost? Assuming that Brook is scared of Big Mom. And you can imagine if that were the case, and at a certain point, the whole Cake Island would just be full of like Brook souls shoved into everything, and you just be hearing yo all over the place. And there is some evidence to suggest that a bit of the person's personality goes into the souls, because there's a pretty widely like accepted theory that pudding slime homie Nitro was made from part of Bedge's soul, hence why that jelly-like thing is wearing a fedora and kind of looks like a mobster. And I also subscribe to that theory as well, because that seems like a really specific kind of look for a homie. One other thing we kind of learn about the soul powers and the homies is that they can potentially be killed or neutralized by inducing extreme fear, or maybe exposed to Conqueror's haki. It's not entirely clear at this point, but when Cracker yells at Randolph to stop, he emits this sort of pressure or wave that scares the bejesus out of them, and anything within that vicinity withers away and dies, leaving empty husks. And however, Randall is fine, which is weird, even though he's a homie himself, and he's the one that was the direct target of Cracker's scream. This might be a case similar to like Moria's like Kage powers, where the source of the shadow or soul matters. If the soul is from a stronger person, or the shadow or soul will be much more powerful as well. And that's why they were put into an animal, whereas a normal citizen's souls maybe were put into regular things like the plant life and the trees and the household objects. But yeah, it's interesting to see that. And it does seem like fear plays a major role in Big Mom's soul powers, because as we know, in order for her little ultimatum thing, in order for that to work, they have to be afraid of Big Mom. And so it seems like fear seems to play a big role in how this power works, and that's the counter to it, is that you can either induce more fear, or you don't show any fear in front of Big Mom. And so, yeah, I think because of that, it makes it seem like Luffy stands a chance, because I don't really see Luffy being afraid of Big Mom at all. And so, yeah, if it comes to the fact that Luffy had to face Big Mom, I think he would be fine from a lot of these sort of conditions. But he may still have to contend with just the raw power that Big Mom poses. But anyways, finally picking up where we left off with Luffy having collected all these copies of his nakama, and they're all just going crazy, acting like wild animals, and you can clearly tell that this was Brulee's powers to copy things, and it looks like not only can she make herself look like exact copies of people, but she can make other creatures look like copies of other people. And I will say, this mechanic comes back in one of the most unexpected, fun, and genius ways. It's like Chekhov's gun. And for those of you unaware of this sort of principle, it's the principle that in any piece of narrative, if you introduce a gun in the first act, you have to pay that off by using it in some way in the third act. And boy, does this figurative gun come back in one of my favorite ways towards the climax of this arc. I love the use of this. Anyways, I know that might be kind of spoiler, but it's so good, and I just have to talk about it. We'll definitely get to that point when we get to that point in the story. But one thing I was not expecting was that among all these imposters, the real Nami was in there acting like a wild animal because of how pissed she was at Luffy for capturing and tying her up. Nami then explains in a slight flashback what happened during their encounter with Brule after Nami was captured. And we never actually got to see this, and this story thread was sidelined for a couple episodes, but Nami is able to escape using her climb attack and propel herself away using sort of the new extending feature, which jabs Brule in the stomach. Carrot tries to counterattack once Nami is free, but then is sent flying back after having her own attack reflected back at her. And this is where Brule reveals her devil fruit, the Mira Mira no Mi, or Mira Mira no Mi, allowing her to become a mirror human. And it looks like she can create mirrors that reflect things as well as make mirror copies of people and things. But the craziest part of her ability is that she can create some sort of pocket dimension called the mirror world that she can trap people in, and also assuming that she can traverse into herself. And this is a unique trait that only a very small handful of other devil fruits seem to possess. Those being the Door fruit, where Bluno could travel into a dimension between doors when he enters his air door, as well as Blackbeard's Yami Yami fruit and Caribou's Numa Numa fruit, both of which allow them to suck things into some other dimension, whether it be Blackbeard's darkness or Caribou's swamps, respectively, and regurgitate them back out at will. And so, yeah, this is a very interesting devil fruit that can essentially create a new dimension. Which is weird. In this case, it's a mirror dimension, which kind of seems like Doctor Strange. But anyways, so as I mentioned in the last podcast episode, that I wanted to wait to talk more about Brule and her references until we learned more about her character, and this is that moment. So now that we know her powers and more about her character, we can clearly see that Brule references a lot of fairy tale aspects, and in particular, the evil queen from Snow White. And like the evil queen, she's obsessed with beauty and mentions how seeing someone as beautiful as Nami makes her want to slash her face up in jealousy. And this also plays into the sort of the evil queen constantly asking the mirror mirror on the wall, who's the fairest of them all? And Oda gave this character the mirror mirror fruit, which is interesting. Additionally, the idea of a mirror dimension also could be a nod to the Alice in Wonderland story Through the Looking Glass, which again shows kind of like the mirror dimension in that story as well. But in any case, with Carrot now trapped, Nami and Chopper are left to fend off Brule and the legions of the homies in the Seducing Woods, who Brule curiously refers to as homies, which is weird. This is seemingly an impossible task. And this part I really loved, though, because it shows just how much growth Chopper has undergone. Because in this desperate situation, he doesn't freak out and cower like he used to. Instead, he takes charge and sacrifices himself by staying behind to hold off all the homies and Brule to give Nami the chance to escape and find Luffy, because that is their best chance at winning. And this is such a great moment for Chopper. I love this. Back in the present, after being told about Big Mom's powers from Pound, Big Mom's top officers from her Sweet Three Generals shows up. And this is Charlotte Cracker, who I'm sure I don't really need to explain where his name comes from, but it's of course a reference to crackers and cookies, as well as biscuits. He pulls Pound out of the ground, and we get this funny reveal that this dude isn't actually a giant, but he's just a very large man with an incredibly oversized head in comparison to his body. The anime really milks this moment, though, to extend the pacing. It takes over 8 minutes into the episode 797 for this to happen, and when this whole moment was just a partial 2-page spread in the manga. But while he's pleading with Cracker to let him speak with Lin Lin, aka Big Mom, to allow him to see his daughters, who are revealed to be Chiffon and none other than Lola, confirming that they are in fact twins and are all one family, and also that Lola is Big Mom's daughter. This then finally jogs Nami's memories of the events of Thriller Bark and allows her to put all the pieces together with what Pudding was saying earlier about her sister who ran away. And I still think to this day, Nami's friendship with Lola was one of the sweetest things in the series. We finally get confirmation to a long-held theory that we've all had, that the mama she was talking about, who was a big shot in the New World at the end of Thriller Bark, when she gave Nami the Bibber card, turns out to be Big Mom. And that also means that Nami has been in possession of Big Mom's Bibber card this whole time. And I don't really know how much of this had that Oda had planned all the way back in 2008 when Thriller Bark was being written. But one thing that's crazy to me is how Oda had this idea surrounding the theme of marriage with Lola and her being the daughter of Big Mom. Like, think about it for a second. 8 years prior, he had must have had the idea for who Big Mom was, how her crew was constructed through arranged or forced marriages, and had this sorry thread of one of her daughters running away to avoid these types of marriages, and carry that with him 8 whole years, only to then finally seamlessly integrate all of that back into the main theme of this arc and plot. It's just wild. And mind you, back in 2008, the concept of the Yonko Emperors and Big Mom herself as a character was just introduced at the end of the prior arc. So it had maybe been like, I don't know, like a few months. But by the time he had constructed all this and introduced the character of Lola and all of that, which is just mind-boggling to think that he kept all of this and somehow he must have had a good outline for how Whole Cake Island, or at least how Big Mom's crew was constructed, because otherwise the story it kind of falls apart. But anyways, just then Randolph comes in to attack the Straw Hats again, but Cracker stops him, and the exchange here is just classic Oda humor. This is a pretty tense scene as Randolph is getting scolded for not knowing his place, but Randolph all of a sudden speaks, and in a very calm manner, throwing his Crane partner under the bus, telling Cracker it was the Crane's idea, to which the Crane freaks out and yells like, "Don't lie, it was yours!" And also, fun fact, Randolph is voiced by Kappei Yamaguchi, aka Usopp's voice actor, who probably doesn't really have anything to do during this arc, because obviously Usopp is not part of this arc, which I find it funny that, again, that they somehow find uses for the main cast to play other characters in arcs that they're not a part of. However, things have gone from bad to worse as Luffy senses just how strong Cracker is, as well as the fact that Brûlé has shown up with this massive tree homie called King Bomb. Now, Bomb means tree in German, so it's like literally he's just King Tree, which makes sense considering how much bigger this thing towers over the other trees. She also displays her ability to copy or mirror appearances onto other beings, as we see all the copies of the Straw Hats get transformed back into wild animals, setting them free. And when Luffy sees this, we get the beginning of what I personally think is a hilarious running joke that I seem to be in the minority, that Luffy constantly calls Brûlé Eda or Branch. And this has got to be one of my favorite Luffy nicknames because of how random it is, but also how much it annoys Brûlé throughout the rest of this arc. I seem to be one of the few people that actually finds this running joke funny, because I don't see very many people talking about this. And in fact, I've seen a lot of threads that people confused as to why he even calls her Branch or Eda. And it's just, I don't know. For me, this is just hysterically funny every time he does it because of just how annoyed Brûlé is. But anyways, as much as Brûlé gets made fun of, she is still a very formidable opponent, as she now captured Chopper in the mirror world. But there's a quick blink and you'll miss it moment where just after Brûlé makes them think she's shattered their mirror, it's shown that they are fine in this sort of other dimension. And Chopper whispers something to Luffy and Nami, but we aren't yet privy to what they're talking about. So it seems Chopper has discovered something about maybe the mirror world or the way Brûlé's power works that he wants to relay to Luffy, but we don't quite know yet. Cracker then attempts to execute Lola and Chiffon's father, Pound, who we learn is named Pound, which again fits their family naming structure, being types of cakes with roll cake for Lola, chiffon cake for Chiffon, and now pound cake for Pound. Cracker tells Pound that all of Big Mom's ex-husbands are expendable, which is pretty cruel when, by accounts, this man just wants to see his daughters and wish them the best, and luckily Luffy steps in to save him. And while Luffy stays behind to take on Cracker, Nami and Pound run off while being chased by Brûlé and all of the homies. Now this set of episodes ends on a pretty incredible reveal. As they're running, when Nami pulls out the Vivre card that Lola gave to her back on Thriller Bark to show Pound, it emits the same energy of the owner, which in this case is Big Mom, and this seems to prevent the homies from being able to harm anyone in possession of this because of the immense power that it holds. means that this can be used to turn the tides of the battle considerably. Unfortunately, we will have to wait for the next podcast episode to get into that and how that shapes the rest of this battle. But yeah, this will bring this episode to a close, and if you did enjoy this, send me a like or comment. If you want to join me on this journey of rewatching One Piece, please consider subscribing. Check out my Instagram at SunnyGo Podcast for updates when I post new episodes and to see some pictures of my manga and card collection. And as always, I wanted to thank you for taking the time out to listen to my podcast. No spoiler section. So yeah, stay safe out there, and I hope to see you on the next episode. Bye!